Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation. I'm Hannah Johnson, Manager of Webinars for Tech Channel. We will be holding a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. You may ask a question at any time during the event by entering it in the Q&A panel. Today's webinar is sponsored by VirtualZ Computing. And now I'd like to turn it over to your host for today, Jeannie Glass, founder and CEO of VirtualZ Computing. Jeannie, you now have the floor.
Great, thank you, Hannah. And welcome everyone to today's panel on eliminating the skyrocketing costs of ETL and expedite mainframe modernization. As Hannah said, my name is Jeannie Glass, and I'm founder and CEO of VirtualZ Computing. And I'm honored to moderate today's discussion with our panel of industry influencers and industry experts. With us today is Peter Rutten. Welcome, Peter. He's Research Vice President with IDC's Worldwide Infrastructure Practice. Barry Wardell, thank you for joining us, Barry. Barry's Worldwide Mainframe Modernization Strategist at Microsoft. Neil Fowler, hi Neil, General Manager of Application Modernization and Connectivity at Micro Focus. Vince Bray, Chief Technology Officer at VirtualZ, and Dusty Froyam, Chief Financial Officer at VirtualZ. And hi, Dusty and Vince as well. And I'd like to start by thanking our panelists for all of their work in preparing the discussion today. We hope you find it informative, and we welcome your active participation in the chat and certainly at Q&A at the end. And thank all of you for joining us. We're glad that you're here. So to start, today, customers have thousands of applications running on cloud and distributed platforms, yet the majority of business critical data resides on IBM Z. And in addition to the data access demands with those existing applications, customers are increasingly moving applications from the mainframe to the cloud and distributed environments. So what's happening is the demand for mainframe data access is intensifying, and the cost and complexity of legacy methods, which require frequently and largely manually extracting and transferring terabytes of static data across your network, those costs and complexity are intensifying as well. Peter, IDC has done an extensive study on cloud and distributed applications accessing data residing on IBM Z. Why is this such an important topic for customers?
Yeah, thanks, Jeannie. So to answer that, I'd first like to briefly take a step back and talk about IBM Z and where that platform is today. So our research, and we do a lot of research into the mainframe, shows that the platform continues to be extremely critical for thousands of organizations. And probably, most of you know that we've just seen the launch of the latest generation, the IBM Z16. And it has at least two industry firsts. It's very innovative. It has an integrated on-chip AI inferencing accelerator. It has a quantum-safe cryptography, which our quantum research shows is very timely. Let me go to a chart here. This depicts IBM Z sales over the past 18 years, the blue columns, and you can also see the average selling price of a Z, that's the green line. And the sales are 3 times higher than what they were in 2009, which was kind of a low point for Z in the past 2 decades. And remember that these are sales of new systems, so they represent about 1/6 or 1/7 of the installed base. So in other words, there are about 15 to 20,000 mainframes out there. And I know that there's this idea that a lot of them are being decommissioned. That's really just a myth. There's something else going on, though, and we'll talk about that. And you can also see that the average selling price, by the way, has been hovering between 500 and 750K, which is almost a quarter of what it used to be. So now, having said that, these IBM Z shops do want to, or maybe I should say they have to, include their mainframes in their modernization initiatives. And the era of a siloed mainframe somewhere in the corner of your data center is really absolutely over. And the biggest reason for this is that the data on the mainframe is, you could say we've discovered that it's pure gold. Businesses have really realized the incredible business value of using their core enterprise data to generate new business and new revenue, and often revenue that didn't exist before. And so they are busy unlocking this data on IBM Z. They have applications on their distributed architecture or in the cloud that they are feeding mainframe data to for new insights. Or they're moving existing mainframe applications to the cloud and have them continue using mainframe data. But there's sort of the issue. The way they feed these applications, mainframe data, is with ETLing, which takes time, is expensive, is risky from a security perspective, and it renders the data instantly out of date, which is very unfortunate because the value of mainframe data is really greatest when it is real time, when you can instantly leverage the data that is being processed for immediate analysis or whatever else you're doing with it. So that's where things get complicated. Feeding real-time ZOS data to these applications, that's complex. And most of you have maybe seen systems integrators trying to develop these really complicated environments to enable this. And as a result, very few organizations can actually do this. What that means is that they have modernization stalls, that they can't leverage the cloud as much as they would like. They can't move the applications they'd like to run in the cloud. And if they do move them, then they get this real-time value, issue. They don't get the real-time that they want, the value from real-time data that they want. These two charts are from the research that you were referring to, Jeannie, and there's a lot more data there. And this is the research that we did on cloud and distributed applications accessing data residing on IBM Z. And it shows how prevalent this problem is. So on average, 44% of businesses say that they have ZOS applications that they can't move off the mainframe. And the lack of real-time data access is a major reason for this. The number is even higher for larger businesses. More than half of businesses with between 3,000 and 5,000 employees are dealing with this problem.
Thank you so much, Peter. Neil, what's your reaction to that data? And at Micro Focus, why do you feel remote data access is so important for mainframe and application modernization?
Well, really depends on your modernization approach, whether you're looking to do things like offloading your development or testing processes, so modernizing the process, or looking to do infrastructure modernization with workload migration. So being able to access the data that resides on the mainframe can really simplify the sort of the configuration, the project in terms of the management itself. So, as Peter was just saying, as workload starts to move to a more cost-effective, agile platform like the cloud, then as you move across there, some of that data might still be accessed by applications that still run on the mainframe. So actually being able to share that in real time and being able to access the same copy simplifies the process, but also enables things like partial migrations. That maybe only some of those applications are moving, and that might be all they do, but over time, that journey continues. So being able to share that access, transparently access to the mainframe, really helps that project go forward.
Great, thank you so much. Barry, we're going to talk on the session today about Lozen, but before we get there, what does Microsoft find compelling about Lozen for mainframe data access for your Azure customers?
Thanks, Jeannie. Sure. I would say that the most compelling reason for Microsoft's interest in Lozen is the ability of the product to enable incremental modernization. The incremental modernization is becoming more and more important. As we approach the mainframe landscape in terms of, or we look across the landscape in terms of complexity, size, and risk, the idea of a wholesale or big bang lift and shift approach is not always appealing to every mainframe shop. But if you have a conversation around incremental modernization, that's something that helps move the needle and allows progress. The idea of moving applications off of mainframe, putting them in cloud, and allowing those cloud applications real-time access to data that still exists in the mainframe is truly supportive of that incremental enablement that the large, complex mainframe shops really require. So ultimately, this accelerates the journey, and that's really why we're excited at Microsoft about the opportunity to advance this incremental modernization.
Great, thank you so much. Peter, from your research, what are the biggest challenges customers face in accessing data that resides on IBM Z from the cloud and distributed applications?
Yeah, like I said earlier, it's about 44% of businesses that say that they have these COS apps that they cannot move off the mainframe. So this chart shows the reason why. You can see the third biggest reason is that the application operates in real time on data that resides on the mainframe. And interestingly, because of this issue, some of the cloud service providers are saying, and listening to Barry, you can hear that certainly Microsoft is not saying that, but well, then why don't you move all your mainframe workloads to the cloud? Which is really such a complex proposition, and a lot of businesses are reluctant to do that. So we have a bit of a stalemate on that front. So to provide the applications that are not running on a ZOS platform access to ZOS data, businesses are using all these technologies. The most common is APIs, followed by file transfers, followed by extract, transform, and load, ETL. And that's what almost 54% of organizations are doing now. They use ETL, according to our data.
Great, thank you. So Vince, with that, could you describe Lozen and tell us how Lozen works?
Yeah, no, happy to. I think, and I think everybody that's spoken so far has touched on it. We see the need for not just remote access to mainframe data, but real-time read-write access, so that you're able to share your mainframe data with applications no matter where they're running. And this is more complicated than it sounds, because it's not just providing access to a set of records or a file. It's also things like recognizing that you may have applications, let's say they're COBOL applications, and they're written to use things like VSAM, and they don't just rely on the content of the data. They rely on the organization. They rely on the ability to do searches for records by their keys, or to read files forwards and backwards, depending what needs to happen there. So it's more than just remote access to data. It's also providing all of the capabilities that mainframe applications would be very accustomed to, no matter where in the network that you are. So the implementation that we've created provides all of that. The data stays on the mainframe. And the advantage of that, of course, is that it's still managed there. It's secured with your mainframe security products. There's no loss of control over all of that data. And on top of that, we also provide all of the, I'll call them APIs, into that data that you might want. So if you need to do record lookups and searches by key, and all of the sophisticated things you can do with VSAM today, you absolutely can do that, even from a program that's running on, let's say Windows or Linux. And what that means, to come back to some of the earlier comments, is what that means is that you can do incremental workload migrations. You can move one application without worrying about the fact that there might be 100 others that are still dependent on the data that are going to stay on the mainframe. our case, mainframe stays, the home of that data. You can continue to run applications that, for whatever reason you haven't moved to the cloud, and they continue to work unchanged, even though you have remote access to the data. And to be clear, it's more than read access. It's also read-write sharing. So if I need to, not just access a record or a set of records remotely, I need to read them and then turn around and update them. I'm able to do that as well. And I get all of the same integrity I would get if that application had never left the mainframe. So again, all of the things that are possible to do with access methods like VSAM are available to the application no matter where it's running. And you get that same behavior, so in other words, if a mainframe application and a Windows or Linux migrated application try to update the same record at the same time, you can get the behavior that you expect there, full integrity of the data. So we preserve the integrity, the security, the management of all of the data, but we let you access it really anywhere that you want to. As long as you got a network connection back to that mainframe, you're good. And I think that's really what's unique to Lozen. So it's a different way of looking at the problem, but it's vastly more streamlined and simplified versus things like an ETL approach, where you might be running big, heavy, resource-heavy batch applications to move data around the network, only to have to figure out how to update that data when mainframe applications might have come along and updated it while it was on another platform. We avoid all of those problems by having only a single copy of the data. And then the last thing I'll mention is that we've also architected Lozen to be very cost efficient. So it's eligible to run on IBM zip engines. So running Lozen, even if you've got a large, huge number of applications in the cloud referencing your mainframe data, doesn't drive your ZOS processing cost up. 90% or more of the compute capacity we use is dispatched on a zip engine. So all the way around, it's a much more efficient way to think about sharing mainframe data.
Great, thank you, Vince. Barry, when you hear Vince describe Lozen, what benefits, in your view, will customers who are modernizing to Azure gain from Lozen?
Well, first I'll say, I think the technology is super neat, but to me, from a customer standpoint, it's really about results, and that's what matters most, right? A lot of as the folks here know, the audience knows, a lot of mainframe modernization programs have stalled or failed or been put on hold for whatever reason. It's generally about complexity, tightly coupled apps and data. Being able to separate that, it just becomes overwhelming. And so let's head into the next round of renewal or more MEPs, right? So the idea of incrementally modernizing, which again is really important here, is what helps us drive results. That incremental modernization, of course, is driving a byproduct, which is cost saving. So as we're consuming less of general processing in a mainframe, we're also realizing greater cost savings, which certainly is a key result that our customers expect. And then, of course, from a modernization perspective, again, the ability now for applications to enjoy all of those advanced services in the cloud is certainly an expected result of our customers. So to me, bottom line, it's about results, and finally moving the needle and getting away from those stalled programs.
Great, thank you so much. Neil, we've been working with Micro Focus for quite a while and appreciate that very much. Can you tell us about the Lozen integration with Micro Focus Enterprise Solutions?
Yeah, exactly. So Micro Focus provides what is known as a replaceable file handler technology. So this allows customers and partners to map file operations onto a different technology. So Micro Focus provides a complete mainframe, CICS, JCL, IMS environment running COBOL, PL1 applications. And when they are accessing QSAM, VSAM files, being able to map that in through the work that VirtualZ have done with Lozen by plugging into that infrastructure allows that transparent access back to the mainframe. So that's the key thing in the sense of once you've got that full system that's running there, you've got all your applications moving across, you can do remote SQL access, but some of the challenges come around on the VSAM, QSAM. But because of that tight integration into that pluggable technology means that the application doesn't know. It still thinks it's accessing the files locally, but really it's just one copy across, and then that data can be shared between systems. So it's a really good way of actually extending and integrating that technology as we go forward.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Vince, in addition to questions about integration with Micro Focus, we also get asked quite often about latency. What should our listeners know about Lozen and latency in your view?
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's an obvious question. When you're sharing a single copy of the data, the results you get are going to depend on how much bandwidth you have, how fast your network is, whether the target is an on-prem server or something in the cloud. But it turns out there are many things that can be done to optimize latency to give you whatever level of performance you want. Down at the lower levels of our system, one of the things I didn't mention earlier is that we've been careful to architect Lozen to use, I'll call them industry standard protocols, like the protocol over the wire is based on the modern versions of NFS. What that means is that caching and synchronization between the files of remote system and the mainframe is automatically handled at the level of the protocol. So if you open a file and you've got that kind of maybe big batch processing stream where you process the same files over and over and over again, you typically would find that you'll fetch that once over the network, and from there forward it's local data to you, so it performs as well as any other local file would perform. On top of that, if we look at the big cloud environments, Azure, for instance, has techniques to allow the customer to implement as much bandwidth as he wants. You can have 100 gig network connections between your mainframe and the cloud environment if you have that need, and that absolutely takes away a lot of the concern here. In a lot of cases, you can achieve channel speeds over the TCP/IP network that way, and certainly the mainframe helps with that too. I mean, mainframe is incredibly scalable, as certainly everybody on the call knows. So adding additional capacity, adding more network adapters, all of that are relatively inexpensive and simple things to do, considering all of the benefits that you get from sharing that data properly. Mm-hmm. So I think you find that when we dig into specific examples of I want to achieve X, there's always an answer to it, no matter what the available bandwidth would be, no matter what the latency requirements would be, and so forth. And I think that's generally the case. If we look outside of the mainframe, I mean, there are plenty of people building things around OneDrive or Google Drive or Dropbox or Amazon S3 or whatever the file sharing technology is. We're just another example of that, and the difference with us is that we certainly have the full capabilities of the mainframe on one side of that make that quite a bit easier to scale to whatever level that you need.
Great, thank you. Neil, what do you see as far as Lozen extending existing data access capabilities for modernization projects and building on those?
Yeah, well, we've been doing modernization projects successfully for years, but I think as you just heard Barry saying, the majority of them have been what would be classed as full migrations or moving contained applications across. As you look at something like an online solution like CICS, there are methods to remotely access vSAM data using inter-system communications. So there's mechanisms for that, remote DB2. But for batch applications, there isn't the same type of equivalent remote access technology. And that's where Lozen comes in and that adds the additional value on that side. So back to that, as we just talked about regarding the integration, the applications are running distributed platform or cloud, believing they're accessing the files locally. But that transparency of access back to the mainframe gives similar capabilities as you would for a inter-system call with CICS. So that's the thing that makes the difference on this one. If you have some of these more complex applications that might require moving incrementally, as part of a continuous modernization story, that allows those batch applications to have a mechanism to continue to share. And I think that really makes a difference and makes some of those projects far easier without having to build in additional processes or controls around how they move that workload and maintain the integrity and currency of the data.
Great, thank you. And speaking of integrity, another common question that we get asked about Lozen is about security. Vince, what can you tell us about Lozen and security, data integrity, those types of concerns customers might have?
Yeah, security is definitely front and center in the minds of every mainframe customer, and we absolutely designed Lozen to be as secure as is possible. So the approach that we take is when a file is accessed on the mainframe's security policies are always driven. So whether you're a RACF, ACF or top secret customer, your mainframe security product is going to control who has access to what files. We don't rely on let's say a Linux system or some foreign client to provide that level of control. It's ultimately in control on the mainframe. And what that means, of course, not only can you have whatever policies you like about who gets access to those files, you can also do auditing. You can also do various types of reporting on who's accessing your mainframe data that way. So a lot of information that way. When it comes to authenticating users, so how do we know who the user is that's accessing mainframe data? We actually give you a handful of different options, very flexible system. If you got, let's say a Windows server environment and you're using Kerberos, mainframe can participate in that, and we know directly the identity of the user running the application on the client side. If you're not doing that, there are a variety of other techniques, everything from digital certificates to mainframe style pass tickets to even simple things like providing read access to almost like a public model where you're willing to give large numbers of clients access. So lots of kind of fine-grained control there, exactly what a mainframe customer would expect. And in terms of the data integrity, the way to think of it is that you get the same integrity you would get if that remote application were running on ZOS. So it's relatively invisible to the ZOS system that the data is being accessed by a remote system. If you've defined your vSAM files, for instance, in a way that provides for sharing, then you absolutely can share the files. If you define them in such a way that access to the files are one application at a time, then that's the behavior you're going to get. All of that's honored. And certainly if you're using vSAM, record level sharing RLS or transactional vSAM, all of that's supported as well. And that gives you, essentially the ability to share things like VSAM files across multiple applications with record-oriented locking that way. So, all of the integrity that mainframe customers would be familiar with is, just a byproduct of using Lozen.
Great, thank you, Vince. Dustin, of course, everyone wants to reduce their expenses. Can you tell us how customers achieve cost savings with Lozen?
Yeah, there's a number of ways that you can reduce costs by implementing Lozen. I'll touch on just a few of them here. And Vince introduced really the key one, which is Lozen is Java-based, and so it's an eligible workload to run on the zip engine. So any of your data requests that are tied to Lozen on top of moving your application workload off the general processor, those remaining data requests will hit the zip engine. We show 90% to 98% of that will be moved to the zip engine for those data requests. Even if you're not moving an application, you're doing a full ETL of a file, we can move all of that over to that zip engine in that kind of 90 to 98% range. Also, if you are implementing our most preferred architecture around you're moving an application and you're still accessing that mainframe data, you're actually accessing only those discrete records. So you're not moving full files, you're moving or you're accessing and read writing to those, say, a keyed file, for instance. And so that reduces the bandwidth and the load to the zip engine, or even if you're still on a general processor and you're running under ZVM. And then finally, another really key one that I would highlight is that Lozen is a true low-code, no-code solution. And so it's going to provide you savings over any other of those workarounds that have been out there by necessity, right? There hasn't been another solution in the market like this. So implementing custom code, APIs, complex change data capture routines. If you're coming back, you got to put that data back on the mainframe. And all the additional software tools, support, maintenance that goes into that more complex ecosystem. Plus, it gives you something to really anchor into a standardized approach for your enterprise. We see a lot of customers that have varying approaches. So different application teams are implementing different approaches to this that increases the expense and the complexity.
Great, thank you, Dusty. Dusty, there's a question in the chat that relates to pricing, so I'm going to pull that forward now. The question is, are there zip charges incurred by simply mounting the mainframe data set on a distributed node, Windows/Linux, with no read or writes done on the distributed node?
I'm not sure I completely distilling that, and Vince, maybe you'll have to tag team this, but just by mounting the file, I don't believe you would incur any workload to that zip engine. So it's really the workload that is occurred there. Obviously, zip engines are charged differently and the software costs are charged differently to the zip engine than to a general processor. Even if it's on the general processor, it would have to drive that workload. And depending on what IBM pricing scheme you're in, it may or may not drive, you're rolling for our average if that's one of your key elements, or an MSU consumption if you're in something like tailored fit. Vince, anything else you'd add to that particular?
The answer there is that when you mount mainframe data, there is a little bit of processing. It's very small. But basically, what Lozen does during the mount is understand the credentials of the client system connecting to it. As I said, it's a very small amount of processing. The most of the processing occurs on as the records are being accessed, reads and writes. And to be even more specific than that, the real processing occurs when reads or writes that can't be satisfied in the client's cache. So, it's generally the data transfer that's driving resource usage, not so much mount and unmount and all of those ancillary things that go along with it.
Great, thank you so much. Dusty, can you tell us how Lozen is priced to ensure customers achieve the cost savings they're looking for?
Sure. So if you've ever tried to find a published price or even a street price for enterprise software, that can be pretty challenging. We wanted our license and pricing to be very straightforward and transparent with a low barrier to entry. So our price is published. It's simply $100,000 per petabyte per year that goes through Lozen. And based on, and this is confirmed by the IDC research, is we think that's going to cover 95% plus of customer needs. There may be some outliers there in that 5%, but in general, it's really intended to be about $100,000 per year for most customers.
Great, thank you. Barry, based on that, how do you see Lozen helping your customers with their business case for their modernization projects?
Yeah, well, first I'll say that helping customers develop an indicative business case at the start of these migration initiatives, I believe, is very important because they're often complex business cases to build. I think here we have an opportunity to really simplify that by bringing in some rather straightforward cost-saving levers to strengthen the business case. And in this case, pretty straightforward, right? We are reducing general consumption, which is reducing cycle time, reducing MIPS, which is reducing cost. And we can draw, we can create indicative views of what that cost reduction looks like. But what's important is how we capitalize on the cost savings and potentially turn that into investment to drive further modernization, further, application moves, et cetera, and in creating if you will, a virtuous cycle of modernization. So what we do is we try to articulate for our customers what that looks like, show them the cost levers. Again, it's a reduction of generalized consumption, MIPS reduction, and that is generally how we lead. I'll say that as these incremental modernizations do occur, however, clients do gain peace of mind, and I really do view that as part of the business case. And so we like to share that with our customers as well. But it is rather straightforward. We're reducing consumption, we're reducing costs, and we just like to articulate that in a very clear, simple way to our customers.
Great, thank you so much. There's a couple questions in the chat regarding how Lozen works. So while we're kind of on that topic, I'll moderate those questions for the audience. Vince, this might be for you. Can Lozen access/update VSAM files that are online with? Vince?
Oh, sorry, Jeannie. I thought you were mid-sentence there. There was a strange lag there. But,
sorry about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've been trying to type up some answers to the questions, but for this one specifically, yes, if you've defined your VSAM file so that it's shareable, then absolutely you can have concurrent access from a CICS region and from us. It goes both ways, actually. You can have some files shared with CICS. You can have other files shared kind of outside of CICS. And, really, as I said before, the result you get would be exactly the same as if you tried to access a file, from an application running on ZOS.
Great, thank you. And then Vince, I think 2 more questions for you. Is the data access to DB2 dynamic or static?
Yeah, so this is probably a good clarifying point to make. And when we first planned Lozen, what we did was we looked at all of the things that are really hard to do on the mainframe today, and certainly VSAM, certainly PDSs. I mean, those kind of data sets, there just aren't good solutions for today. DB2, our feeling was that there are a lot of solutions for remote access to DB2. If nothing else, IBM gives you JDBC drivers or ODBC drivers, pretty much in the box with DB2, and that gives you a reasonable way of accessing DB2 remotely. There's also a big community of vendor products around remote access to DB2. So, we didn't necessarily want to start there. So you won't find DB2 access in our initial release. Having said that, the design that we created with Lozen is very open-ended. We can plug in new data sources with minimal effort, and we totally expect that as we engage more deeply with customers, we'll find reasons to do. It might be IMS-DB, it might be Database, it might be Datacom or IDMS from Broadcom. I mean, all of these are definitely targets for us. We would just like to kind of hear the requirements from customers before we head down that path.
Great, thank you, Vince. And then one more question, Vince, before we go back, to the research and so forth. Does Lozen support the Broadcom CA Datacom database access?
Yeah, so it's a funny thing. I'm going to answer that with it depends. We believe, and unfortunately, we don't have access to a Datacom installation to test this, but we believe if the customer is running Datacom's VSAM transparency features, then yes, it would you would be able to access that remotely through Lozen, through the VSAM transparency layer that Datacom offers. It's probably the kind of thing that we would have to spin up a partnership with Broadcom and at least validate that and see if a more native access is warranted.
Great, thank you. And we would love to do that, and I believe Broadcom would as well, but we can work on that as needed, as Vince said. Peter, I guess those that covers most of the questions in the chat. There's a couple more that I'll address here, but just kind of coming back to this discussion, how would you summarize the findings from your research, and what do you see customers stand to gain if they do solve this data access challenge we've been discussing?
So our research confirms what the previous speakers have been mentioning, which is that you avoid significant cost. The problem with ETLing is, of course, that it consumes, based on our research, 8.4% of your total MIPS on average. That's actually a lot. And for almost 1/3 of all organizations, that MIPS consumption is bigger than 10%. And if you translate that to dollars, you're looking at, on average, almost $700,000 per year. And that doesn't include anything like personnel cost, opportunity cost, because of the time that you consume to complete data transfers, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the even bigger problem is that you're avoiding something that we've been talking about, which is the fact that you're always working with stale data, not real-time data. And in terms of performing analytics nowadays, that's just not acceptable anymore. And that's not just an issue for your own organization. You may have partners that need access to your mainframe data. And that happens a lot. Our research shows that in the case for almost 40% of businesses, there is a partner that wants to access that data. And they're going to reach a point where they say, we need that access to be more real time. So, to summarize, first of all, like I said, you're eliminating the out-of-pocket cost of ETL that I mentioned. The staff that is involved with that process can be focused on more productive work. The time involved is eliminating. You're eliminating those really complicated architectures that I mentioned that systems integrators will build for you to provide that access to COS data. Not to mention the cost of those systems integrators and the time that is involved with them doing that. It means that you have more immediate access to the data. Like I said, the data is not stale. It's real time. It really improves the value of what you're doing with that data. And now that you can access data in real time, data on COS in real time, you can also move more applications that need that access to distributed and cloud environments. Like I said, your partners who need access to COS data will be a lot happier. And then, you've also done something, more foundational, which you've accelerated your mainframe modernization process. And I'm sure almost everyone is in some stage with that today, everyone on this webinar today. Your applications aren't stuck on the mainframe anymore. They can be in the cloud, they can be integrated with other applications, and they can still process COS data in real time. And if you can move these applications to the cloud more easily, and you have access to real-time COS data, then there are all kinds of opportunities to leverage those applications within a larger, more integrated fashion. And all that will sort of multiply. And it ultimately leads to lower cost, more business opportunities, and new revenue.
Great. Thank you, Peter. We have another question in the chat. Again, Vince, probably for you. Can Lozen be used as a copy or export tool for DB2 data to PSQL, for instance?
Yeah, so, again, we're not a DB2 access product, but if you, and it actually brings up a really good point. If you had, a simple way of exporting your DB2 data, certainly we can transform it into something like a CSV file that you might be able to import into really any database. And the interesting little side note there that we haven't touched on yet is that data transformation is a built-in capability of Lozen. We understand that when you read and write mainframe data from other platforms, a lot of applications aren't going to be able to deal with, EBCDIC encoded data or mainframe style dates and timestamps or, whatever the issues are there. So, one of the things that you can do with Lozen is as you access a file, you can have the records transformed into really any format that you want. So, an extreme example of that, you might have a VSAM file with, names and addresses or something like that, and you could automatically transform it into, a spreadsheet that you open in Microsoft Excel. So, those kind of transformations might help you with things like you getting data out of one database and into another database.
Great. Thank you, Vince.
Yep.
That, I believe, is all of the questions that I see in the chat. Let me just one last time. And that looks like it. Barry, Neil, anything that you want to say before we close based on the comments and discussion so far?
No,
go ahead, Barry.
No, thanks, Neil. I would just encourage anyone who has struggled with modernizing their mainframe or is at a point where they are struggling and it's due to this tightly coupled environment to have a look at Lozen and consider this as an opportunity to simplify that process, to advance that process.
Thank you. And Neil?
Well, I don't need to say anything then, because basically what Barry said was going to be my point as well, because I think the key thing with most of these things is realizing what is possible, and the capabilities and the technologies are there to help you perform modernization on your applications and solve those problems. The issues or constraints, as Barry was saying from a few years ago, many of them have been resolved, and there's techniques and processes to help those move forward. So it's great with technology like Lozen that helps any of those applications or projects that might have had this as a restriction in the past. It gives them a way forward. So best thing to do is to really start looking at them in detail again.
Great, thank you. So in closing, Peter, Neil, Barry, Vince, and Dusty, thank you for sharing your expertise and insights with us today. It's always a pleasure working with you, and preparing for this panel was no exception. And thank you to all of you who had joined us for this conversation today. We hope you found the discussion lively and informative. And if you'd like to learn more, there was a question in the chat about how to access more technical information. And we do have several demos on demand where you can dig in further. We're also open to scheduling live demonstrations or technical deep dive discussions if and as that would be helpful to you. We have all of our email addresses, and we welcome your comments, suggestions, and feedback, and any other questions you have for us offline. With that, Hannah, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Jeannie. I just wanted to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and I especially wanted to thank everyone here, including you, Jeannie, for sharing their insights with us today. So later this week, watch for a follow-up email containing a link to the recording of today's webinar. You can get all the latest on all things tech by going to techchannel.com/subscribe. That concludes our webinar. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks,